Hi, welcome to AES 597, Asian Transnational Communities. My name's Eric Pito, and I'll be your instructor this semester, guiding you through this very interesting course. But before I introduce you to exactly what we'll be learning in this class, I want to begin by sharing a recent experience I had watching a video on YouTube. Hopefully, this anecdote will help illustrate why I created this course. A couple of years ago, during APIA Heritage Month, that's in May by the way, one of the videos suggested to me was titled, "Why do we celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month?" There was nothing remarkable about the video itself, nothing that stood out that made the video really unique, and that's precisely the reason why I'm bringing it up. The video begins with the question, why do we celebrate APIA Month? You see, the video doesn't just explain what APIA means, Asian Pacific Islander American. It tries to explain why we celebrate APIA Month. And it does so in the same way that a lot of Intro to Asian American History videos do.
To understand the origins of Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, as it's called now, we really have to backtrack all the way to the 1970s. The 1970s is this really exciting moment when Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, for the very first time, play an active role in shaping policy.
And each of the people speaking in the video, each of them attempt to communicate why Asian and Pacific Islander American communities are important to America. They do this by situating APIA people within the broader history of the United States. And just like so many other workshops, courses, and video essays, it does this by originating the term Asian American within a broader narrative of the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s in America.
The two key factors for understanding how the Asian American 1970s came about was really the Black Freedom Movement. That is the dedicated insistence of Black Americans for racial justice that really had this incredible momentum through the middle of the 20th century.
And for this reason, African Americans, they become the primary reference point for understanding why we celebrate APIA Month in America. This is a really interesting thing if you think about it. Just reflect on it for a second. You see, Native and Latino Americans, the other non-Black and non-white racial communities in America, remember, there are only 5 official ones. Native and Latino Americans don't really do this. Their origin story as racialized people, it doesn't rely on African Americans to bring relevance and significance to the story of why they formed their identity as groups in America. So why do so many scholars and educators of Asian American history, why do they do this? You see, unlike African Americans who were forced originally to come to this country, Latinos, many of whom have ancestors who lived in parts of the United States before it even became the United States, and certainly Native Americans in this country. Unlike them, narratives of Asian Americans often create a picture of a people who chose to live in America. So if this is true, and I'm not saying that it is entirely, what parallels can be drawn between the Asian and African American experiences? And are these parallels strong enough to create a reference point to use African Americans to understand Asian Americans? You know, the other thing that I wonder about when I watch videos like this and I see those black and white images of Asian laborers in early American history is, what do each of these people think about? Not about their new lives in America, but what do they think about their life back in their homelands? You know, I'm not going to do what so many Asian American educators do. I'm not going to try and shoehorn Asian American experiences into the broader Black experience in America. Not in this class. It's not that there's anything wrong with doing this. there's certainly a place for reminding ourselves, those of us who are Asian American in this course, about our connections to Black communities in this country. But here, to get you to begin thinking about what you're about to learn in this class, I want to highlight one of the major obstacles that keep us from fully understanding why Asians are in the United States. When I watch videos like these, they seem to suggest that Asians in America really only start forming their identities as a community after they arrive. And so I always wonder, what about their homes? The homes that they left behind. How do they continue to imagine their families and their lives back over there? Centuries ago, when Asian laborers and settlers were coming here to the United States, it had to be true that even after living here for so long, they must have missed their families and their friends, what the air smelled like back in their homelands and in their old neighborhoods. You see, their story didn't start and stop when they arrived to the United States. Some of these immigrants returned home eventually, but even those who stayed, surely even they thought about and longed for their lives back home. None of that stopped when they got here. And the thing is, especially today, many Asian immigrants in America, they can go back to their homelands. Some of them do. They visit, and some of them even resettle back in Asia, maybe because they were forced to, or even some of them made the choice to retire. Immigrants today, they don't only call or message their families back home, though many do constantly. Even before there were airplanes, Asian immigrants in America longed for and imagined the life back home. And these longings and imaginings, they materialized into things. They wrote them into songs and poems. The walls of Angel Island, for example, are filled with these stories. This connection is a transnational one, and in our class, this transnational connection is the primary driver for how I want you to start thinking about Asian American identities and communities. So instead of rooting the story of Asian Americans in 1968, when Yuichi Ichioka and Emma G coined the term Asian American, I want to go back over 20 years prior to 1945, more specifically to August 6th and August 9th, when the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
Now, I'm not saying that the identity of Asian Americans originates in 1945. Not at all. So why? Why then do I choose 1945? Well, when most history textbooks present the year 1945 in America, they usually talk about it in two ways. The first is that 1945 was the year that World War II ended. And secondly, it's also the year when the global system of empires and imperialism came to an end. That's what most textbooks say. And it's true. When the United States dropped those bombs, Japan, one of the last emerging empires, it did surrender, thus ending the reign of the Japanese imperial government, marking the end of World War II. But in truth, many, including myself, argue that the war, World War II, it never really ended. It just transformed into the Cold War. As anthropologist Hina Kwong says, the Cold War began where Cold War II never really ended. You see, instead it produced overlapping wars of decolonization and counterinsurgency across Asia. Empire didn't disappear, it just mutated into provisional occupations, shadow wars, and other development regimes. It's the overlapping of these violent exchanges that I want to focus on in this class, and how this violence impacted generations of people in Asia. But what does this have to do with Asian Americans? Well, if you don't know this already, many communities that formed in the United States from Southeast Asia, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Hmong, Laotian, and Burmese, they all originated from those very shadow wars. These wars, waged through years of bombings and killings, not just by the US, but Britain, France, and Australia, they were also fought by soldiers from Korea and Japan. These connections weaving together generations of people, violence, and trauma are what Kwan means when he says that World War II never really ended. I'll talk more about that phenomenon, what it means in next week's lecture, but for now, I want you to begin thinking about how these connections are formed between countries and nations. In this class, it's not just about seeing these connections and realizing that they exist. I want to give you the tools to begin asking why they exist and how they're made. They're partly made by what's become a global competition for resources and capital. We know this. But also the migration of bodies, both voluntary and forced, and of course, wars. But if you begin questioning the world around you simply by looking at the wars and the atrocities on your phone, or just thinking about your own experiences living within your own immigrant communities, it'll be very difficult for you to see how other countries and people are connected with one another and yourself. And just as importantly, it's imperative that we recognize that people have been and are constantly being transformed by these connections. All of this points to one of the key terms you'll need to understand in this class. This term is transnationalism. You know, if I could rename this course, I would call it Transnational Asia. That's how important this concept is. Transnationalism describes not only the actual movement of people, money, and goods, things, but also the circulation of ideas, how they move back and forth across borders. It's a lens, a framework for thinking about the world as a deeply interconnected place. People often confuse transnationalism with globalization. Globalization has certainly made the world more connected. For instance, there's so many examples that I can throw out. People in Senegal, of course they listen to American music. But the thing is, Americans are increasingly listening to Senegalese music. And of course, there's the example of K-pop. We already know that Koreans are deeply familiar with American culture. But K-pop and Korean dramas, they circulate globally with massive audiences all around the world, but also here in the United States. These are just two examples of globalization. Exchanges that are happening at unprecedented speed and scale. Transnationalism describes something different. It's the sustained back and forth ties of people, money, and ideas across borders. This term describes phenomenon like Filipino nurses who constantly send remittances back home to the Philippines, or Chinese diaspora communities who maintain political influence both in the United States and in China. But what I want you to imagine in this class is that the world was already connected long before the internet, airplanes, or cars. Asian laborers had been settling in North America for centuries. And through these letters, poems, and songs that they wrote, they shared knowledge of life abroad with families back home. For example, Chinese migrants in the 19th century circulated remittances and news across the Pacific back to their homes in China, while working as indentured labor in places like the Caribbean and the American South. You've heard of coolies, right? The concept of transnationalism gets you to move beyond thinking about people, but also the things, stories, and imaginings that connected Asia, the Americas, and the Caribbean well before modern globalization. These circulations of people, money, and ideas have been happening for centuries. And the world has been transnational for a really long time, much longer than most of us realize.